Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Squared Up Coffee Break webinar. This month, we are talking about providing external access to Squared Up. My name is Matthew Long, and I'm joined today by Adam Kinniburgh.
Hi there.
Adam is our support, test, and systems lead. So he actually, runs systems internally, and is also the main liaison and point for you guys coming in via support. So he's very sort of customer facing. And the reason we've got him on this month is this topic is actually one that we've picked up via support. Several people have asked about this in the past. And one that we recently highlighted to us. So we thought we'd show off what is quite a cool solution and hopefully address some needs that you guys have been experiencing with Squared Up that isn't necessarily in the immediate remit of like day one, you deploy the thing, right, how do I do this? But starts to come around as adoption starts to build for Squared Up in your organization. So, okay, with that, the topic. So what we're going to be looking at this month basically is, mechanisms for providing secure external access to Squared Up. So everyone's using it happily internally. But now you need to actually put that thing out on the web for various different parties to consume. You need to make sure that you can actually do that in a safe and secure manner. So we want to talk about some of the reasons why you do this, then look at some of the various different solutions you could use, and then finally dig down on a case study and actually show you a live demo of using Azure App Proxy to do this. And the pitch here is that you can do it without changing any external firewall ports or putting Squared Up on a externally facing server. So that's a pretty neat use case. Right, with that, let's get started. So, first slide basically is talking about why you want to do this. So you've got Squared Up installed. Why on earth do you want to push monitoring data externally? For me, there's three big scenarios for this. The first one is providing access to users working remotely or out of hours. Like, the fact of the matter is that most organizations are doing change management. When they are, those changes are nearly always occurring outside of business hours. Those engineers are often working from home, or they're contractors or whatever. They need access to monitoring data because when it all goes wrong during the middle of a maintenance window, that's when you need timely access to data. And the last thing those guys need to do is be fumbling with VPN tokens. Oh, my VPN account's locked out. I need to drive to the office, all that kind of thing. Like, that's a problem. You need to get people responding quickly. So providing sort of access to remote workers or out of hours workers is like a really key kind of scenario. The second one that's kind of important and isn't necessarily obvious is providing access to mobile users. Now, most people wouldn't try and typically use SCOM from their phone, but everyone's got alert notifications configured, right? So, and let's face it, like it or not, most users' interface to SCOM is they have an email that tells them to go and look at something, they go and look at it. Now, if you're using our HTML alert notification script, or if you've never heard of that, if you're putting URLs in your alert messages to say, click here in the browser to go and view monitoring data, which is pretty typical, right? Because your email can only really contain a small amount of information that you need to actually solve an alert. Users are getting that on their phone. Their phone may not be in the office, or it might be on the Wi-Fi, which is not on the same corporate network as your LAN station. So, like in the example here in the office, right, Adam, our Wi-Fi here is not on the same network. So people's phones, they can get their mail, but they can't actually go to any of the same links. So how are you going to do that? So if you're providing that out, you need a single consistent URL people can hit internally or externally to be able to access that monitoring data. Now, if you just heard me mention HTML emails then and thought, ooh, what's that? Go all the way back to coffee break number 1. And the very first coffee break we ever did is a script that we have on GitHub that enables you to enable HTML formatting on SCOM alert notifications. So you can send out really rich emails that have got images and coloration, all sorts of cool things going on, and do like conditional formatting and things, which is quite cool. So having sort of emails come through that are really rich and then have like links to the appropriate object, the alert, and the relevant applications and things like that. This is all possible. So having that then get drive to Squared Up really helps build adoption. So definitely check that out if you haven't seen that before. And then the third scenario is providing access to third parties, so customers, consultants, or vendors. So if you're an ISV, and your business is providing monitoring services to your customers, then obviously you need to give them access to this thing somehow. Or maybe you've got consultants or vendors working on a piece of technology or on a related system, and again, they need access to monitoring data for some reason. Maybe it's for maintenance or otherwise. Typically, they're not on your network. They're working remotely, or in the case of customers, they are obviously remote. So again, you need a way of providing secured access to them, to this environment where they only have maybe a subset of data, or you don't want to grant them access to the entirety of your corporate network to go ahead and do this. Or maybe you don't want to go and grant, an entire user VM, this sort of stuff that they can remote into, that kind of stuff. Now, when you go ahead and do this, the other thing is that external access might now mean you have to comply with internal or regulatory standards. So for example, we have a customer where the second they publish something externally, they have to have two-factor on it. They just have to. So Squared Up doesn't support two-factor out of the box. So you've got to make that work somehow if you're going to publish this externally. And this can also be quite tricky due to the sensitive nature of monitoring data. This has got like FQDNs and other sort of sensitive things in there. So the proximity of Squared Up and SCOM to the DMZ is usually like pretty far separated usually. If you go, oh yeah, we want to deploy Squared Up and a SCOM management server into the DMZ, you're probably going to get told no. So this could be a challenge as well to how do you actually tunnel people all the way into what is probably your internal network without causing sort of concerns about people using that as a jump box to attack other systems. Okay, so I asked Adam to compose a list of sort of ways of doing this because he knows the hardware market much better than me. There's basically two kind of ways of doing this, right? So the first one is appliances.
Yep, exactly. You can go hardware, or well, I guess for most customers these days, that would be a VMware appliance or a Hyper-V appliance, or even something deployed in Azure. So these will typically be a load balanced farm of appliances that provide access to internal web apps, and you probably already have them if you have a large estate of web-facing applications, and perhaps it is just load balancing. But as long as you can get external traffic to that device, you can load balance it to SCOM, and typically you can use all sorts of security policies and access restrictions and that kind of thing to provide that secure front end at a sort of hardware level rather than just relying on your internal authentication mechanisms.
Yep. So it's worth noting that these are not just like load balancers. These are really like these application delivery controllers are like next-gen load balancer kind of things, aren't they?
Exactly.
This isn't just like a request comes in, I forward it to a port. This is actually much smarter than that. But like you say, almost everyone's got these. And then the second set are sort of more software solutions that are specifically geared towards this, right?
Yeah, exactly. So AirWatch Workspace one is a nice example using VMware Horizon in the background, so sort of virtualized desktop delivery to provide a workspace to a remote user that gives them a sort of similar experience to if they were internal on the network. The others are very similar. They're fundamentally for delivering either applications or desktops to remote users through a nice simple web portal.
So the sort of app delivery platform we want to show you today, so it's the second category, is Microsoft's offering, which is called Azure AD Azure Active Directory Application Proxy.
That's the one.
Oh my God, it's the wordiest term. So Azure App Proxy is what we're going to be calling it for the rest of this coffee break.
Yeah.
And basically what it is it's a really simple way to provide access to a system without making it internet facing.
Yeah.
So no putting it in the DMZ, or without making any changes to the application or any firewalls.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I find like very common scenarios these days is, the sort of hybrid environment. So you might have already started moving a lot of your assets up to Azure or AWS or any sort of cloud provider. You might have a bunch of stuff on-prem that you can't move for, like you said, security or regulatory reasons. Azure App Proxy is a nice use case here where you probably already are using Azure AD. Maybe you're using Office 365 instead of Exchange, that kind of thing. So you're using a tool you probably already have to provide access to Squared Up.
And the nice thing about this as well, compared to maybe some of the previous solutions we just looked at, is the licensing model is basically, do you have Office 365?
Yeah, exactly. If you're using Azure AD Premium on top of that to provide access, if you're using Azure Active Directory in general, chances are this is all part of your subscription tier anyway.
Yep. I think if you have Basic, don't quote me, I'm not an Azure licensing expert, but I think if you have Basic, you have a limited number of apps you can provide.
Yeah, I think it's up to 10 apps per user you can publish without paying extra for Azure AD.
Right. So if you're currently using 0, then you're good to go with using this. So the reason we came across this is A, some customers asked about it, and B, it's been done already. So Jan actually published a blog post quite a while ago on doing this with V2 of Squared Up. So credit to him there. There's a blog sort of walkthrough on doing that. So we thought we'd run through that, and then we've sort of expanded it a bit in this coffee break today as well. So all credit to Jan there for sort of first documenting this and coming up with this particular solution. So basically how this works is the app proxy creates a tunnel basically out from your app to the internet. And the brilliant thing about this is it can either act as like a direct tunnel. So like whatever traffic comes in via Azure gets sent straight through, or it can enforce a logon with Azure Active Directory first. And that's how you really actually like secure it. From what interest of what we care about today, that's the model that we're going to look at. Like you could just have it pass straight through, do no authentication. Anyone who hits the website isn't able to get to square that up. But obviously that relies on you being able to really harden your environment, right? Like you've got to be able to harden that internal server now because it's now effectively internet facing.
Exactly.
So putting that login in the way first is great because now you're only really worried about someone who has to have compromised credentials before they can start attacking you. So, still assume breach, but at the same time, you've really narrowed the scope of attack there.
Yeah.
Now, if you do have SSO enabled and AD sync is turned on, then actually you can do full end-to-end single sign-on, which is really cool when your user's already signed into Azure anyway. They click the app and they're in squared up and there's no login at all.
Yep, that's it.
Which is really quite sexy. No firewall changes are required, which is quite cool. I'm going to show you how that works in a moment and why that's the case. And it's worth noting that because endpoint security is provided by Azure, you get all of those features rather than having to put up with whatever we implemented. So you get multi-factor authentication. You can define all sorts of complex rules and policies as well, can't you?
Yeah, exactly. So if you have a scenario where maybe you do want to protect squared up with multi-factor, but you're already using other apps native to Azure, you can create policies that say, squared up only requires MFA, but everything else continues to work as is. You can be really flexible with it and keep it as secure or as open as you like.
Can you limit it to certain users only as well? So
and even by times of day, that sort of thing as well.
Okay.
So, only this particular user group can log in, only out of hours. And other than that, that's it, that kind of thing.
Cool. Okay. So there's a lot of options there as well. So how this works, I'm going to demo diagram here just to kind of prove the point. You keep saying no firewall changes required. Well, how does that work? So got a example here. Here's your environment. There's squared up, sat in your organization on a VM. Could be in the cloud, could be on-prem. What you do is you install the application Proxy Connector. This is a little Windows service, basically, that ties through to your Azure subscription. What it does is it establishes an outbound connection to Azure App Proxy, and then that connection acts as the tunnel for incoming and outgoing data. So the reason this can basically not bypass your firewalls, but the reason this works is that typically servers that have internet access, and this will have to go in a box that has access to the internet, though obviously you can lock down which URLs it's allowed to hit and things like that. Generally, firewalls are configured to say that outbound access is allowed, but incoming access is not. So once that tunnel's been created by the outbound connector, it's then really easy for all traffic to come in. So that's how it works without any changes to the app. It's basically acting as a gateway, as a tunnel through to Azure, only for traffic that Azure is authorizing and only on the sort of defined port and on the defined range.
Yeah, and even if you have a web proxy in your environment, you limit outbound traffic, whatever. As long as the proxy is configured to allow that particular server to access the internet, the installer for the connector comes bundled with a nice little script that lets you push the connector service out through your web proxy as well.
Oh, that's cool. So it automatically configures sort of things you need.
Exactly.
There. Awesome. So what happens then basically is a user comes along with their phone or with their laptop. They hit Azure App Proxy. They sign into Azure Active Directory. They get like a portal, which you'll see in a bit, that has like all your apps. And when you click on one of those apps, so I want to see squared up now, the Azure App Proxy tunnel is what's used to route that traffic through to the app proxy. If you've enabled SSO, then what happens then is the application proxy talks to Active Directory, validates that your account is able to log in, that kind of thing. Then it can basically impersonate you. That's why you need AD sync turned on, right? So it can tell that the Azure AD account and your Windows domain account are the same, and it should be using that.
Yeah.
And it then locally logs on to the application proxy connector as your account, and then starts talking to squared up using it. So as far as squared up concerned, it's just seeing traffic coming from the server that the proxy connector is installed on as you. So that's why if you have Windows Auth enabled, it just works. No reconfiguration of squared up or anything else required there. If you don't have Windows Auth enabled, or you choose not to enable this impersonation, then basically what happens is you then get the squared, instead of using forms, you now get the squared up forms prompt as well.
Yeah.
So if you don't want to mess around with doing SSO and everything else, then you just have to log in twice, which will be fine. And if you've got different escalation accounts to your Active Directory accounts anyway, like even if you have AD sync turned on, but your user at contoso.com account is not your privileged monitoring account that you use for logging into stuff, well, you'd want that second log on regardless. Otherwise, all you're going to get is an error saying, I can't log you in because you don't have SCOM permissions. So it's really easy to set up. Basically, can you install that proxy connector somewhere? And it's really lightweight, isn't it? Like we're talking a small little service.
It's a tiny little file that hardly consumes any resources while it's running. So
you can install it on the squared up server if you really want to. Like there's no need to go and provision a whole VM for this thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Okay, so with that's enough of my voice for a while. I'm going to hand over now to Adam. Oh yeah, who's going to walk us through doing this. So let me just bring up our Azure portal.
Yep, the very attractive Azure portal.
Change the colours.
First of all, I think it's worth probably just showing sort of what this means to users, like how you can actually use this. So if I first sort of show you the Azure App Portal, so this is just myapps.microsoft.com. You log in with your Azure AD credentials, your Office 365 account, however you want to refer to it, and any apps you have published appear here. And you'll notice that even includes things like Outlook and PowerPoint, all the sort of apps you would get through your Office 365 subscription.
Right.
So where this is kind of nice is if you do have a large environment, it's hybrid, you've got some apps here, some apps there. For your sort of typical business units, this is actually like a really nice front end to give them access to the traditional apps as well as the new apps you're deploying in Azure and any web apps you have on-prem. So you'll notice here we have
Outlook and Teams and everything else.
Yeah, exactly. So this is all the stuff you get bundled with your Office 365 account. If you're using Teams, all that kind of thing. We have Zen app deployed for demo purposes. So you can see its front end sits here. Anything that we've configured as an app is in this dashboard, and this is all user role based. So I'm seeing this because I'm an admin. Users with more limited access, you can only see certain sets of apps. So a nice use case here is once you have run through what we're just going to show you, you might have your HR team who have one squared up dashboard that shows them the status of SAP or some other big sort of HR tool. You can publish a link specifically for their squared up dashboard, which is available in their apps portal. And when they hit it and log in, they go straight to their dashboard. No need for any navigation or having to browse around or record links anywhere. You can publish an app specifically in here. Any URL internally you can make into an Azure app.
That's a really neat use case actually, because they will forget, like building adoption of end users is hard and they will forget it and just keep emailing you asking this up anyway. So that's a great way of kind of putting it in their face and say, look, here's the page, go to this thing.
Yeah, exactly right. So I'll just show you sort of how this works. So in the background, like we said, we have the Proxy Connector. So in this case, I've created a group, the int domain, that's our internal domain. And here we have one server, our sort of remote access server running on-prem, running the connector, and also one of our Azure-based squared up demo servers, also running the connector. And this domain sort of spans both of our sites. So by having a connector in sort of both places, depending on where the resources are that you're trying to access, it will use the most appropriate connector. So in this case, if we have an app that is hosted in both sites and one site's offline for whatever reason, the connector on-prem would be used to access the on-prem version of the resource. It's pretty smart, and obviously you can deploy as many connectors into these groups as you like. So if you have multiple sites, you might have different groups for different sites, so you can really sort of target that access to the right place. So yeah, if you have a site, just some stuff in Azure, you could have a couple of connectors there, a couple on-prem, keep it nice and simple, and guarantee it's sort of up all the time.
Likewise, you could also, if you want to sort of, again, bypass some maybe draconian change management policies or let individual users manage this thing, or admins manage this thing rather, you could set up groups for each application, like squared up group, have my 2 squared up servers in HA, put a connector on both of those. Yep. They're used for squared up and nothing else. The squared up admin can manage those and not have to worry about someone else making a change in policy or anything else. Like those are his servers. Different app comes along, it wants to use Azure App Proxy as well. Great, we'll just install them on your servers, and you can really limit who's actually got this for the firewall rules and that kind of thing. Exactly
right. So we'll just sort of jump in, hit configure an app. In this case, what we're seeing is the on-premises app deployment wizard. So you can deploy any number of apps. If I maybe just do it from here instead, just to highlight that. So by default, you can get this like massive catalog of all these built-in integrations. So if you use Dropbox or ServiceNow or any of these applications that you'd find in here, and you want to use Azure AD in front of them to provide a real sort of single sign-on to these external applications, chances are there is already an integration sort of set up, and it's just a simple wizard. You log into that service as an admin, authorize Azure AD to allow people to connect, and then it appears in your app gallery for everyone who's authorized to use the app.
It is somewhat terrifying. It says all 3,000 apps.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's pretty comprehensive. So it is a really good option for sort of larger environments. Chances are the tools you use are all in here. And if you want to have a sort of real sort of simple environment for your business where you use one set of credentials to access everything, then this is a great option. But for now, we'll go back to the on-prem application. So we'll just give this a name. We're just going to call it squared up. Nice and simple. And we basically just tell sorry, this is just the microphone getting in the way of me seeing the keyboard. We basically just put in the URL of the server we're connecting to. And it can be fully qualified. It can be internal because the connector is internal. It's on, it's in our DNS zone. It knows how to find my server. So squared up v4, and it has to end with a slash at the end. In the next section, we can configure a sort of friendly external URL. So in this case, I'm just going to put my initials. So when I want to use this, I can either go to myapps.microsoft.com and sign in and see my whole portal, or I can jump straight to this friendly URL, log in with my Azure AD credentials, and get through to my instance of squared up.
Mm.
The other options you have in here, so as you said, we can use this as a sort of simple tunnel. So by turning on pass-through, when I hit this URL, it will take me straight to the front page for squared up. In my case, we're using Forms Auth on this box, so that it would take me to the squared up forms page. But we want to make this a bit more secure, so we're going to put Azure AD in front of it. I'm going to say it's available only via this connector group, which, like you were talking about before, you can have different connector groups. You can force traffic specific ways using that. And because squared up is obviously nice and responsive, as we all know, I don't need to modify the application timeout. And because we're just doing Forms Auth, I don't need to pass any authentication through headers or the app body. So I can just leave that sort of as is. And when I click add, it will create an application. I won't wait for this to provision. We'll just go to the application that's sort of already there. It only takes a couple of minutes, but just for the benefit of the demo. So if I just sort this out a little bit. So this is the one I showed you sort of before. Inside here, you've got a load of configuration options, but just to highlight a few of the good ones, you can obviously add a logo to it.
Yep, very important.
You can turn on user assignment. So this is what I was talking about. I can limit this app to only appear for certain users when they log into App Proxy, and you can do that by Azure AD group or with AD Sync, any of your on-prem groups. If we also look at single sign-on, in this case, I've got it disabled. So basically, I'm going to sign into Azure AD. I'm going to authenticate. If MFA is enabled, I'll put in my code from my text message, that kind of thing. And it will then take me to squared up. The other options in here, there are quite a few, and it's worth sort of having a read about them. But basically, you can tell it to save credentials. So if this is a great one for a sort of service provider environment, maybe you don't want to actually give them a login for your internal domain.
Right.
Maybe you just want to give them a sort of limited Azure AD account that's not synced on-prem or anything like that, and then cache a service account in here. You can do some nice stuff.
Right. So like, for example, let's say you got a customer, you got 5 logins, as it were, for that customer. You have one account, which is, customer at contoso.com or whatever internally, and then all those accounts come in, just get mapped to that one account.
Yeah, exactly right.
All customers to one account.
Yeah, so you're never having to provide your sort of secure, perhaps you've got a monitoring subnet or something like that. You don't want to give out access to that necessarily to external parties. You can sort of save it. You can bake it into the app if you like. So they log into Azure AD using a controlled account, but they'd never have to see the internal AD credentials.
Nice.
The other option is integrated Windows, like we talked about. So this is a case of if I'm using my laptop and I'm on the domain and my AD is all synced and all that sort of stuff, I hit the My Apps portal, it authenticates as me, as the Windows user, and it doesn't prompt me for anything else. In this case, just to sort of like show.
You missed the most important option there, Adam. LinkedIn sign on. Come on. It's not
LinkedIn sign on. It's linked sign on. I would encourage you to have a read about these options. I mean, even just sort of like if you click on one, it tells you all about it. But basically, yeah, there's a couple of options, but cool. The main ones that'll appeal will either be you're not going to pass anything through, and you're just going to use Azure AD as a front end, which we are in this case. So just to sort of like highlight how it works, I'm already signed in to Azure, obviously. If I just click on my app here, which is configured, it will do a little bit of stuff. And then there we have a squared up forms login. And you can see we're using this sort of friendly URL that was configured for this app, prod-squared up, that sort of thing. So in my case, if I wasn't logged in at all, I could go straight to this URL. I would go through the Azure authentication steps. I would type in my text message code from my MFA request, all that sort of thing. And then I would hit squared up. And just to prove that this is one that actually works. And this isn't just for demo purposes. You can log in and you will get a dashboard, I say. Yep, there we go. So yeah, this is it's a great way to sort of use squared up externally, and like you mentioned, HTML emails. Using that the guide that you mentioned, you could configure all of your SCOM alert emails to use this address within the script, and whenever you click on that view alert link in the alert email, it will take you to this page. You'll have to log in through Azure AD, which is obviously nice and secure for external, but it will get you straight to your alert that you're trying to reference.
And as you mentioned, like if you have got SSO enabled and your domain joined and domain synced and everything else, if you enable that integrated Windows authentication option, you'll do nothing different.
No, exactly right.
You'll hit Azure. Azure will know how to get your user account out of that automatically. It'll authenticate you. It'll send the request through to Squared Up, which is because the app proxy is impersonating you, also works and logs you in. So your internal users don't have to mess around with 2FA or have anything different or even a different URL. You get one consistent URL you can access anywhere, and you would end-to-end have the same experience. You could probably change, if your addresses are being sent out via template, you could probably change it and no one would notice. Other than one day someone would look in the URL bar and be like, oh, what's this MS app?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's pretty neat.
One other thing that's just worth highlighting, if you do think like this is a bit daunting, certainly internally, we've had comments from a certain other presenter on this webinar frequently, that there are a load of apps in here that we don't use and that sort of clutter this screen.
Yeah.
You can get it to publish these apps into the sort of nice little friendly app picker in the top corner of Office 365. So if you are just on your mailbox and you want to go into Squared Up, you can put that app there where you'd normally find your like Office 365 admin and Outlook, mail, contacts, calendar, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
You can put it there, or you can use this, or just publish the URL somewhere else.
Yeah, that's really cool. I saw as well there's an option with the app to say don't put it in this catalog as well. So if you were
exactly right.
If you were publishing something that was just like for an internal team or whatever, an individual group, you could turn that off and be like, you have to know the URL, otherwise you can't see it.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. So the other question I was going to ask with this and kind of raise the talking point is that we've had a number of requests from people saying, can you secure open access? Now, internally, the answer to that is no, because by design, open access isn't supposed to be secured. But that can make it tricky to provide those sort of service status dashboards via open access to a wider audience. And this is another way of letting you do that, right? Because, again, you're putting Azure Active Directory in front of your auth. Let's say, for example, you're a university, you want to provide a status dashboard to all of your students. Universities seem to all have this for all of their students.
Yeah.
The student logs in, they use the credentials they use to get their campus mail and everything else, all the other resources. They click on the dashboard page, and it's actually just an OA page being fronted by that, and bam, there you go. There's your
exactly right.
dashboard. So I think it's like a really, really powerful, cool thing to use, and it seems that easy to set up. There's a lot of power and flexibility there. Like you say, if you want, you're going to show us the role stuff. Is that all in here as well?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So if we just stop fighting with the mice. Let me just double check where we are. Yeah, so under conditional access, you'll see we already have a couple of rules in here. So by default, we don't have MFA turned on to access Office 365 yet, but we do use this to use Azure AD in front of our build system, Jenkins.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, that's quite a valuable system for us. So we have a custom policy. I won't go into the specifics, but you can create a policy that'll basically say when you're a user in this particular group accesses this particular application to require MFA, to require all sorts of other conditions.
You could do location based as well, can't you say, from this IP?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so you could limit this specifically to your head office URL, or maybe you're configuring these for a branch office, that kind of thing. So yeah, you can only log into this web-facing app from a very specific location, only if you're in a specific group, and only if you're using two-factor authentication. So you can really lock it down. I mean, it's not just like crazy Wild West internet access for your internal systems. It can be as tight as you want it to be.
Yeah, and given that you also pointed to a specific URL and things as well, like from a security standpoint, you are fronting the security of this via Azure. Hackers are, when they hit this thing, hit your URL, they are hitting Azure first. They are going through Azure servers and Azure traffic. This isn't like a redirect or a simple pass through in that sense. So you really are securing this quite well. Like this is best in class security you're getting here for free, effectively.
Yeah, exactly. We occasionally have sort of queries on support as well, where a user might have, for example, the SCOM report operator role. So they don't have rights to see anything in Squared Up, to see anything in SCOM, but we still allow them to log into Squared Up because it is a SCOM role. You could use this as a front end to control access to Squared Up as well. So if you are already using Office 365 or Azure AD and you're worried about all your named user licenses being consumed, rather than giving users the access, to the server, maybe it's got kind of an obscure sort of corporate name anyway, publish something nice and friendly through Azure App Proxy, put a link in people's Office 365, however you want to do it, and limit it to a specific user group that way.
Very, very cool. Excellent stuff. So let's jump back to the slide. So there's a lot that we talked about through there. I want to just summarize a couple of the kind of important points that we covered and also just make sure that we haven't missed anything too important. So, when you're setting this up, it's pretty easy to set up, but there are some sort of considerations that are pretty important. So just to sort of recap, the location of your connector agent is obviously important. A simple thing to do is just install it on your Squared Up server. That makes traffic access pretty easy. But you might want to go through a load balancer internally. So if you've done the hard work of putting a load balancer in front of Squared Up and making sure the thing's highly available and SCOM's highly available and everything else, it seems a shame to waste that effort when you could then just say, well, actually, we'll install a connector agent and it will communicate through to the internally load balanced Squared Up URL. So you can kind of like direct everyone internally and externally through the same load balancer, same loading settings, all that kind of stuff. Other important point, obviously, is if you've only got one agent, that's a single point of failure. So we do recommend that you install more than one collector agent.
You actually get quite a nice big warning in Azure AD as well when you're configuring this if you do have less than two connectors per group.
All right, so it's on a group basis, cool. So we do recommend, like kind of with Squared Up, think about if you want HA or not, or how you're going to provide this in an available fashion in the case of an outage. Likewise, if it's important for you to provide monitoring data externally, you might not want a single point of failure. You install a second agent. Obviously, don't install 2 copies of the agent on the same box. That's defeating the purpose of the whole thing. The second one is single sign-on versus forms auth. Like single sign-on is really cool when it works. The ability to externally, like I said, on your domain join laptop, go to an Azure URL, have that sign you into Azure automatically, have that forward traffic across the internet to your internal machine that's then signed in automatically and goes through to Squared Up. That's neat, but
when it works,
that comes with the cost of you needing to get your head around Kerberos constrained delegation. Because for all of that to work in the scenario we've just described, unless your collector agent, Squared Up, and your management server are all on the same box, you will need to tangle with Kerberos constrained delegation to get this all working. And you have to have, like we mentioned, AD domain sync as well for this to work. So there are some prerequisites there. And if you haven't tackled these things before, it's probably worth you really thinking about this and assessing your comfort level with enabling this stuff, because it can be a real rabbit hole if you try and configure it and you find out actually because you've got like trust in forests and those other issues, it becomes very sticky and difficult suddenly to get this actually working. So if you've already got HA, if you've already gone through the pain of configuring SSO, brilliant. Just go ahead and leverage this. If you haven't, ask yourself if it's really worth the hassle when you could just force people to log in via a second prompt. That's all you're asking ultimately is like, we're using Forms Auth still, log in via Azure, then log in via Forms. And as I said, if you're using different escalation accounts to access SCOM data anyway from your like 365 accounts, you'll have to do this regardless, right? Because if your Matthew at squareup.com account is a low privilege account inside your domain internally, and you're using like privilege.matthew.whatever as your escalation account to get monitoring data to get server access, you'll want to log in via that account, and it'd be annoying to every time you go to this URL have to click log out and then change to the appropriate user. So just keep that in mind. Obviously, you can go and set up multi-factor authentication. One thing I didn't touch on, or I don't know, I'm going to ask this question. This is for my benefit. Can users configure how they want to be tested individually? So could like one user say, I want to get a text message, another one uses the Authenticator app, that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a feature of Azure AD, basically. If you set up your Office 365 login, it'll typically ask you to provide an email address and a phone number. And if you don't provide both, it'll use whatever means it has to get in touch with you with your lovely little code.
Cool. So you can like grant, this is a user choice now. You have to have multi-factor, but we're not going to force you to use a certain technique. So
yeah, exactly.
It can be useful when you want to have your executives come in via one policy and not have to worry about phone tokens and things versus your sort of users, your normal users who you can trust to actually get this sort of thing right. Not that I'm advocating giving executives access without using MFA, but I know it happens in corporate environments. So there we go. And then the last sort of point I want to talk about was providing a friendly URL. Now, we saw there that you can put in and have Azure configure a friendly URL. But I say friendly in sort of air quotes that you can't even see. But I say friendly in that sense because it still has like msproxy.azure.net on it.
Yeah.
If you want to have a truly like, contoso.com/squared-up sort of or /monitoring URL, you're going to have to manage that yourself. And be aware that obviously if you do that, because this whole thing's secured by HTTPS, you need to use a mechanism where you're not going to have certificate issues where you present the URL with one cert and then it gets bounced to so the request gets bounced to a server that has a different URL and a different certificate. So what I'd recommend probably, if you're up to this and you really want to have as a really nice friendly URL on the front end, you might be better off publishing like a single page app or something in Azure, and all that page is a redirect to your actual monitoring URL. So users can put in like contoso.com/monitoring, and that just then forwards them through to the Azure App Proxy direct URL, so that you don't have to contend with sort of like certificates with secondary names and all that kind of thing going on. So that is one thing to note. Otherwise, hopefully that's been really cool and something that you guys have sort of seen and had a thought for. But like I said, the main use case of this was just thinking about like how are you going to give remote access users, out of hours users, and mobile phone users sort of good, consistent access to Squared Up, because they need that data often, like now when an incident occurs, and it's not always appropriate to sort of just require them to drive into the office to do so. So hopefully that was cool. I gave you some food for thought on how you could use this, or maybe use some of your existing tech, if you're using one of those application delivery controllers already internally, which you, as Adam mentioned, probably are. Okay, with that, I'm going to wrap up and do some resources. So if you like this session, if you've got a topic that you'd love us to cover, my suggestion would be to go to community.squareup.com, go to our answers platform and raise a question on there. We have thousands of users on there posting answers and questions every month. So you might get an answer to your question before we cover it, and people in our community are generally much smarter than we are, so you're bound to get a good answer from them. And we do peruse those forums as well, looking for cool and interesting answers and topics and things. So that's one of the great ways of boosting that up and getting us to cover that on a coffee break. If you want to sign up for future sessions, if you've got a colleague who you think would really enjoy this sort of stuff, or a friend in the industry as well, you can go to squareup.com/coffee-break-series. There's a sign-up form there. You can plumb your credentials in, details in, and we'll email you every month to remind you to jump on the webinar and see cool stuff. The recordings and slides are published via our blog, so squareup.com/blog. So you can get the slide deck and the recording and all the useful links we've mentioned in this coffee break. And also a whole bunch of other useful content as well. So definitely worth checking that out. And there's also a YouTube playlist for this series as well. So you can go and watch all the previous coffee breaks we've done, which cover a range of topics, including Squared Up, SCOM, enterprise monitoring. We've got customer case studies. There's all sorts of really good stuff. And Azure resources, all in this sort of area. And like I said, if you haven't seen the HTML notifications coffee break, because you're sort of newest to the coffee break series, go back to coffee break number 1, where you can hear me very nervously explain how to configure that feature as SCOM. That's quite a cool thing. Last little shout out before we go to Q&A. As I said, we are going to be at Ignite this year. Both myself and Adam are going to be there. This is your first time going with Squared Up, isn't it, Adam?
Sure is.
So we would love to see you. If you are a Coffee Break alumni, come along and say hello to our booth. We're right by the, I can't get the booth number for you, I've forgotten now, unfortunately. But we are right.
2016.
We booth number 2016. Oh, cool. So we are right by the food court, which is the more important thing, right? So after you had your lunch, come over and say hi before your next session, and we'll have some cool stuff to show you there. And obviously you can come meet us face to face and chat about sort of coffee break stuff or Squared Up or anything else. Last little shout out, if you're on this webinar or watching this on YouTube and you've blocked all your Squared Up emails because you're sick of getting spammed by our marketing department, it's worth noting that we have just today announced a preview of Squared Up v4 coming out the release webinar is going to be on the 12th of September. So if you've blocked that recently, go and search through your junk folder, find that email, or go to our website and you can sign up there and see all the cool, exciting new things coming that we've been beavering away on for the past year and a half. So definitely look at that if you haven't seen it before. Now, thanks for that long wrap up. We're going to go into Q&A with the people on the webinar live. So if you're watching this on YouTube, this is a great reason to come and watch these recordings live. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat, where myself, Adam, and our engineering team will attempt to answer them for you now. If not, thank you very much for joining us, guys. Thank you very much, Adam.
Thank you very much.
And we'll see you guys either at Ignite or next month.